starting with the cathedral. That's an important place, and an important place cannot have such a simple name. The Cathedral of Santiago, come on. No way. That's the Holy Apostolic Metropolitan Church Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela. Try to remember all these details. We'll make a test at the end of the day if you pay attention.
It's okay, everybody. I got it on tape.
5 euros for the intro.
How much you will charge them for? All right.
Just a bottle of wine each, you know.
Oh gosh, you're in the trouble. In front of us, it's the result of quite a long period, because in and out, that's a completely different monument. The church inside is Romanesque. The church inside has the shape of a Latin cross. Inside is 800 years old, but outside it's impossible to see that, because this is a sort of double facade made in the 18th century, Baroque looking and much higher than the actual building inside. That sensation of height is also increased by the fact that we are lower than the square behind. So the cathedral has been done on enlightenment, and it's held by a chapel underneath. So this is lower than the square behind. This is higher than the street behind the building. The result is a town that it's been done almost like in terraces, because this is a mound that had a name in the past, that was Libredon, where there was nothing but a forest where a hermit was living. Look at the facade. On top, St. James. St. James, Santiago, Diego, Jaime, Jacobo, Jacques. It all comes from the Hebrew word Yaakov, more or less pronounced like this, okay? He was one of the 12 apostles of Jesus. He preached in Spain. He went back to Holy Land. He was beheaded in the year 44. And can you see underneath the the statue of St. James, two statues that look like him? The two disciples. They were the ones that brought from Holy Land, from a place called Jaffa, that still exists obviously, the remains of St. James to the coast of Galicia. Why Galicia and not Alicante? That was much closer. No answer for the question, unless we use the local style. Why not? They did. They made a burial. They looked after the site. The place was completely forgotten after both disciples died, and goodbye. We don't know anything else about it except word of mouth, the oral tradition that kept alive the belief that somewhere around here the remains of St. James were buried. And in the year 813, lights in the forest pointed that hermit I have just mentioned, the site where the remains was located. In fact, if you see in between the two disciples, can you see that sort of rose with a casket inside, a star shining above? People said, oh, it was like a star shining point in the side. And they started calling this the field of the star. Translated in Latin, Campus Stellae. And that would be the origin of the second half of the name of the town, Compostela. So Compostela would come out of that. Is this a story, let's say, more documented? Yes, the story I told you, let's say the briefest way of explaining it. The longest way would be never end, because millions of pages with different interpretations have been written. But are we here to do a tour, or are we here to do a lesson of history? No, we are doing a tour. So we will leave it like that, because I don't know anybody so far who's able to say, okay, see this line. These are facts, and this is myth. This is legend, this is history. Not so easy to be 100% objective. And the first lesson of a tour guide is never talk about religion. The second lesson is never talk about politics. Never talk about football. And never talk about sex. What do we talk about? There's nothing nothing left.
The weather.
And in Santiago, with 40 parish churches and a town that was built, because of what it is, of a pilgrim's route, we have to talk about religion, because every building was linked to that. directly or indirectly. But that part of the history, anyway, has a result. And that result, let's say the effect, it's very obvious, you know, it's around us. This is real. The way to Santiago, the pilgrims who came here, the development of an infrastructure that crosses Spain and part of France, you know, made exclusively because of the Pilgrims' Way, those are facts. That was a hospital for pilgrims. Hospital understood on the sense of the word, you know, hospitality. Yeah? They could stay inside and sleep and eat and rest for free 3 days if it was summertime, 5 days if it was winter time. Nowadays they can stay 3 days or 3 years, but not for free. The building, it's being done by Isabel and Ferdinand. Those were the monarchs that created a country known as Spain. The building was done a few years after the arrival of Columbus to America. And for a long while it worked with that function, but later the pilgrimage to Santiago declined and that became the regular hospital of the town. Which is why the building behind is the College of Medicine that we don't see from here, but was built there when this was the hospital. In fact, people of a certain age remember perfectly well the building when that was the hospital. And it's a sort of shocking to see the spaces, you know, that before were used for different functions, you know, and now are used for other very different ones. Particularly the most beautiful restaurant of the building, which is the building of the restaurant of the kings. It's called Los Reyes. Beautiful room, beautiful room. We always lie when people ask us, what was that? You know? We always say, well, these were the stables. What a change, they say. Yeah, and we think, oh yeah, if you would know. Because the restaurant is wonderful, but it's in the foundations, you know. What's usually in the foundations of the hospitals? You say it, not me. If we would know many times anyway. So the building is beautiful. Anyway, it's Renaissance. Can you see the entry, the rectangular structure? That rectangular structure with vertical and horizontal lines, imagine that made out of wood, not a stone, you know. That's like an altarpiece of a church. That's what we call Plateresque, which is a way very often. I found interesting that this was done only 15 years after they finished building facades of buildings. As if there were altarpieces of the cathedral. This was an old palace of the 18th century. Sorry? The man who made it was called Carlos. Carlos. And I can perfectly imagine the architect who was hired to build that, you know, sitting down in the square, watching at that, thinking he was on a trouble. Because building something in front of that facade is not an easy job, because he knew he could not compete. That is the symbol, that had to be the symbol. So what did he do? Instead of trying to imitate, he changed radically in just a tiny little time, you know, from vertical to horizontal, from something extremely ornated and carved, you know, into the lines of classicism, you know, so from Baroque to neoclassical in just a tiny bit. What's that now? That's the city hall, and one part of it is used by the government of the autonomous community. Santiago is not the economical capital, but Santiago is the administrative capital of Galicia, of this northwest part of Spain. So we have one building that it's used by tourists, one building that it's used by public servants, one building, which is the rector's building of the university, that it's used by the university, because it's the rector's building. These are the three pillars of our life and economy. We live out of 30,000 students, 3.5 million visitors, and 7,000 public servants. Do you understand the word bureaucracy? We write it with capital letters here. Obviously not in here, but spread throughout the town. There's a lot of buildings that work for the autonomous community. It's impossible to classify that building from an art history point of view, because it's a sort of collage. They made it in the 17th century, but the entry, the tympanum, the statues on both sides, they belong to the 15th, were brought from a building, so they recycled the entry and they fixed it there. But it looks Romanesque changing towards Gothic. I love the building. It's a perfect building for a tour guide. No matter what you say, you will always be a bit right. It's a 17th century building with a 15th century gate that looks like a 13th. Fantastic.
And we believe.
First time in life. The date on this one is 1770 something. 1770. It's a, yeah, in fact it's a, I mean the architect was called really not Carlos, it was called Carles, Carles Lamour. He was French. And he made a building, you know, that really reminds a lot, you know, those days when many palaces in Europe, you know, were done more or less at the time when the mass would be over. Is that okay for you?
Sure.
So this is also interesting. Bueno, pues vale. Están detrás de la. ¿Qué hago? ¿La llevo yo? Yo le digo.
The restaurant, can you hold it?
Yes.
Somebody.
Si alguien tiene una urgencia, yo le digo dónde está. Ok. If, es que no es tan fácil hasta el final de la
We have to
visita.
go to the other side or do you want to go to...
Does anybody need to go now?
No, okay.
It's okay? The building that we have in front of us, you know, where the sunshine, the beautiful sunshine, is the biggest building of the old town. It's much bigger than the cathedral itself. And that was the monastery of the Benedictine order. The Benedictines was the first order arriving to Santiago de Compostela, looking after the remains of the Apostle St. James. And the history of religious orders is more important than we think, because nowadays we tend to think about that like something exclusively religious, but not so long ago, church was much more than just that. You know, we had ecclesiastical provinces and we had royal provinces. Santiago is the perfect example of ecclesiastical province, and Coruña, where we will go later, is a perfect example of royal province. This was handled by them and by Franciscans and by Dominicans, etc., etc. And Coruña was run by who? By guilds, tailors, sailors. Do they have a cathedral there? No. Why not? Because of that reason. They have churches, of course. You know, people. It doesn't mean that they were anti-clerical. It was just a question of function. Benedictines inside the building abandoned it in 1835. Why? Because that was the time when those frictions among state and church exploded, and this country confiscated the land of the church. No land, no rents. No rents, no income. We're talking about an urban monastery, not about a rural monastery. They could not live out of the garden because the building is so big that they had so many people inside. Monks left and never came back to this building. There are other ones that are inhabited. What do we do with it today? Nowadays is the College of Social Work. So one part of the building is run by the university. We also use it as the seminary. One part of it is run by the church, and we use it as a hotel. Very simple, because the old cells of the monks still look like cells of the monks, but with a bathroom. But it's well placed. I must tell you that there are 245 stories about the shell. So I will tell you the one that I like the most. If you like it, you remember. The way to Santiago de Compostela, you know, has a point of end. What is the goal? Where is the goal of the way? This, you know. Where does the way begins? That's a question that so many times I'm asked, you know, and it's a logical question, but it's because we live on the 21st century. You know? Because if we would live 800 years ago, we would never make the question, what are you talking about? Where does the way begin? The way begins wherever you start walking. There's no beginning. You know? People were coming from so many countries that, because of what I told you, where do they have to walk through France? You know, in Toulouse, Tours, Limoges, Le Puy, the different ways converge. Those four main ways then become two in the Pyrenees mountains. And those two, after they approach Pamplona, they become just one. So at the end, all the ways converge. And looking at the lines of the shell, you know, with so many lines coming out of so many different parts, you know, converging in one edge, it was a wonderful way of reflecting all that. all those ways coming here, which is why we call it Vieira. And Vieira is a word that comes out of via. And via means what?
Way.
Way. So all the ways lead to Rome, all the ways lead to Santiago. Equivalent. And they killed two birds with one stone. Because I'm sure you all remember this painting by Botticelli. You know Venus?
Venus, yeah.
Born out of what?
The shell.
Out of a shell. The shell was a symbol of life, fertility and fecundity, but classic, not Christian. So everything that is pagan, let's say, if possible, must be Christianized. And that's how they made it, using it for the way to Santiago de Compostela.
About Egyptian art, we talk about Egypt, isn't it? Or when we talk about Greece, we talk about Greek art. If we talk about Rome, we talk about Roman art. But we talk about Romanesque, what do we talk about? We talk about a moment. We talk about different countries. And this is called like this because it's like the rebirth of some techniques of construction that were forgotten since when? Since the time of Rome. It's like let's start again. After the 4th century, there was a big regression. People forgot how to build big things. That's why when we watch at this, we have to keep our eyes and we have to understand the building linked to that moment, the moment of relearning. Because if we compare it with a Gothic church, or if we compare it with a Renaissance cathedral, it makes no sense. I am not going to convince you that this is the best church or the most grandiose or whatever, no. But if I would be a student of art history in Oklahoma University, probably I would not have to learn a lot of things around, but if I would study medieval European art, this cathedral would be one of them. They made a great job. This vault that nowadays building it is a piece of cake, when it was done, was not at all a piece of cake. It was something really difficult. But they wanted it because they could decrease the risk of fire. Instead of using the wood roofs, it was better this, and they would improve the acoustics. Nowadays our priests speak and chant a little bit. When they built the cathedral, most of the liturgy was singing, was chanted. The Gregorian chant was basic, and as pure as the chant was, as pure as the prayer would be. The triforium we see up there, that corridor that comes all around, those have been used for many things. But when they built the cathedral, it was used for those days when there was a special mass going on a high altar that people could not see because it was a private space for the clergy. In fact, many people here, when they go to Mass, how do they say? I am going to hear the Mass, which is the right expression, in fact. But in those days, they could not be like we are now. Men and women would not be together. Women would be where?
On one side.
Up. And men would be down. But you are also right, because later, it was by sides. I remember the countryside where I grew up, and my grandparents, as soon as they arrived to the door of the church, my grandpa sat with the men, my grandma sat with the women, and it was not compulsory. It was a tradition, only a tradition. A new priest came to the church and told them, forget about this is over, next Sunday if you come back, please sit down together. And they all look at the priest and say, yes. But what do you think happened next Sunday? About the side A, when we see all this structure, this is a pilgrim's cathedral, and obviously there were crowds, but really crowds. This was packed with people. And the side aisles, as we see today, help the movement of people around, coming in, getting out without blocking it.
and also processions. Processions were always indoors, and that's why the side aisles articulated that movement. Nowadays our processions are outdoors, most of them. We have a saying still in Spain, when you are very sad, but you look happy, and someone who knows you welcome to you and tell you, oh, you look great. We answer, hold on, procession goes on inside. Like your feelings are hidden, and it's an expression that come out of those days. So we see the result of something that it's finally architecture, This is a building, and it's functional, adapted to the need. And the need was the liturgy, but the liturgy now was not exactly like the liturgy in the past, and that's why some parts, may sound now not so functional, but they were very functional. And very symbolic too, because it's a cathedral. Can you see the rope? Now we change. Can you see the rope hanging from the Polia system? Some days, when there's something special that the church wants to solemnize, instead of burning and blessing the incense on the small censer, on the small thurible, they use a very big one, which is more or less this size, this high, that they tie to the rope, and 8 men from the other edge of the rope pull it, and because of the double wheel of the polia, it swings this way until it gets to the inferior part of the circular window up there. So it's quite impressive, because the object, even though it's not huge, the swinging is so long that at the end the end result, the speed, is really big, And I've seen many times, how people sitting down exactly where you are, without being aware that would happen. Suddenly, after communion and before the last blessing, in that moment of introspection, you see a censer burning incense and flying over your heads at 45 miles an hour. And the first thought is, I hope these men know what to do. So I cannot say that is a show, because it's part of the liturgy, but I can say it's quite spectacular, and that explains why on many places in town you see postcards and t-shirts and this and that, because it's like a guide. Nowadays that only has the religious meaning, but in the past it had 2 meanings, 2 uses, one liturgical and one hygienic. Pilgrims arriving to Santiago, Middle Ages, their hygiene condition was not so good. In the Middle Ages, people used to get a shower once a year if it was a leap year. So obviously the result of that huge concentration of people indoors was not good. And it's the most valuable part of the cathedral. But the concept of this kind of statues, when they were done, was more moralizing than aesthetic. This was done in 1168. This could be seen from the outside, and this was done because it was a way, of teaching people, but also preparing people before they get into the church. So there's always a message. Who are the 4 over here? From right to left, those are Moses, Isaiah, Daniel, and Jeremiah. How do I know it? Because the names are written there, and that helps a lot.
Daniel is smiling.
Who are the 4 over there? From left to right, St. Peter, St. Paul, St. James, St. John. So we have in that side, prophets. In this side, apostles. So which testament we have printed there? The Old. And here, the New. What separates the Old Testament from the New Testament? Jesus. Before, after. The name of this is the Port of Glory, because what this is talking about is the glory of our Lord. Who announced that? The prophets. Who spread the message of the Son of God? The apostles.
Atención, por favor, atención. La Catedral de Santiago, meta de peregrinaciones, es un lugar de oración y conversión. Silencio, por favor.
Who's underneath Jesus? St. James. Who's underneath St. James? Me. And you. People. And who are we according to the architect who made this? We are pilgrims. Pilgrims who came following a way that has a name, the way to Santiago. But the goal, is St. James the goal of that way? No. St. James is the way to Christ. That's why he's in between us and the statue just above. So the meaning of the Port of Glory, basically, is this. The column that we see right on the center is the representation of the tree of Jesse. The tree of Jesse, it's always representing the genealogy of Christ, like a tree that starts from the base and goes through. The section of the column that is right on the base of it, that's the representation of the heart of Jesse. David, Solomon, Our Lady, and the Holy Trinity would be all the way how the tree spreads. Until not so long ago, people used to come here and touch with the base, in the base of the column, until they left the fingerprints, of a hand that was a way of thanksgiving. Or why is this so special? Why was this so special? You may disagree with me, but when I see tympanums of medieval churches around Europe, very often I have the sensation that looking at those statues is like looking into someone that tells you behave, because if you don't behave, you will burn in hell. Very often statues are very tough, very serious. It was more the idea of the God of the Old Testament, everything very serious, very scary. Mateo didn't do it like that. Look at the face of Moses. It's very serene. But look at the smile of Daniel. A prophet of the Old Testament smiling like that in the 12th century, believe me, you're not going to find it so easy. He's smiling because he's looking at Judith, and that's why Judith is blushing. The 24 elders of the Apocalypse all around the arch, are turning their faces talking to each other. St. James over there seems to be telling something to his younger brother St. John, who almost smiles. He's trying to explain why we used to bump the head in there that he does not understand yet. The last two are talking very actively. So what is all this about? This is about a way of doing things that it's, even though the word is very early for this period, there's a strong touch of humanism on the way how all this is expressed. It's more about hope and redemption than about fear. And what is this talking about? The Apocalypse. But on a very different interpretation.
The high
so it's really
altar
beautiful.
was done in the 17th century. So it's not the original one. It's much higher, much more elaborated, gold leaf. It was a different idea of art. I have nothing against it, so don't misunderstand my words. But it's two concepts. Romanesque, the statues we saw, is more a style to look in. Baroque is more a style to look at. Baroque was done, in the moment right after Reformation, and Baroque is the style that wanted to point out clearly the differences with the Protestant style. If they did simple churches, what did we do? The opposite, elaborate. If they said no saint, we fill up everything with new altars honoring them. If they say no Madonnas, what's the name of more than half of the cathedrals and churches in Spain? Santa Maria. When I'm traveling around and someone asks me, Manuel, what's the name of that church on the top of that hill? Santa Maria. I'm right 70% of the time. So art, also show the moment, show the moment. And that altar was part of that moment. The other one was lower because that way they could get the daylight from the back of it, through the windows of the apse. Because what we miss here, this is the same. But what we are missing is something that would change our perception of the building, which is the original daylight. That was a window, and another window, and another, and another, and another. Not with stained glass, but with alabaster. That would filter the light in, making a very different looking on it. That's what we are missing, the light. And someone described architecture
like that concept that plays with volumes, materials, and lights. Okay, we walk by slowly, and you will see how in the statue that precedes the high altar, people walk by, and as Mariluz has explained you, they hug the statue of the Apostle St. James. Is that the reliquary of St. James? No, his remains are underneath. We will see where they are. Come this way. Look at the architecture, really austere, really austere. That building, anyway, used to be a cloister monastery, which explains why all the grills and all that. Nowadays, the nuns are demi cloister. For living on a cloister is great. We have to be absolutely isolated from the outside life. But the problem they had here are the acoustics of the square. This is the best place in terms of acoustic outdoors. And every single concert takes place here. So those Benedictine nuns know more about musical tendencies than I know. And time ago they decided to enlarge the number of activities they had. They also have a kindergarten, and they make the best almond cakes of the town. So now the cloisters, that is demi-cloister. It's an abbash rule. Before it was really beautiful to buy the cakes. Now it's nice, but not as much, because when they were really cloistered, they couldn't see you. So you had to go to the other side. And in that turn, you know what the turntable is?
Yeah.
The turntable, bumping 3 times, blim, 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 until you hear a voice from the other side that would tell you, Ave Maria Purísima. And then you had to answer, sin pecado concebido. Or would you like, brother, 2 almond cakes just done, please? And then they put the cakes in their side, you put your money on your side, the turn goes round, they are paid, and you get the cakes. And I always thought it was a beautiful tradition, because it's like a sort of commercial relationship based on faith, on mutual faith. Because after you put the money, you have faith you will get the cakes back. And vice versa, because they also trust you. Now you go there, you ring a bell, and then comes out, hello, can I help you? Not the same. But the Dominicans and the Mercy Order, still they are more strict, and still the rule is like that. The name of this square is double. Here we are in the Quintana de Mortos. What does Morto mean?
Dead.
Up there is Quintana de Vivos. Vivo means alive. Why deads and alives? Because this side around us here, this was the cemetery of the town. The cemetery of the town. They took it away and they opened the space. Someone living these days, now, this is not so huge, but reminding that we've seen the square of the Obradoiro, the square of Azabacheria where we came in, the square of La Quintana, that we will see the square of Platerias. Honestly, it's very infrequent to find a medieval town in Europe that was walled like Santiago was in the past, with so much room around. And how could that be possible? Because they remade it, They remade the space around they remade the streets, they built new buildings, and now the result is one town with a medieval structure, with a medieval cathedral, but with a Baroque aesthetic. Santiago is medieval because of the history and because of the cathedral, but not because of how it looks like. This is Baroque too. The house of Conga, the old residence of the canons of the Baroque. But the contrast with the wall of the Benedictine monastery makes it be very beautiful. It's like balanced, well balanced. The grill that you see there, and you see with a piece of wood covering it now because they are restoring that part of the cathedral, that's the outside of the holy door that I pointed when we were inside. The green door. That until 16th century, until the time of the Reformation, the whole of Europe was doing the pilgrimage here. But especially in the holy years, the amount of people multiplied incredibly because there was a strong importance that people used to give. I don't know about today, but before everybody used to give a huge importance to the concept of the indulgence. For free, the possibility of sailing to the port of La Coruña. And I'm sure, that most of them would like to do it because they would save a few thousands of miles, of walk, crossing France and crossing Spain to come here. But only in the holy years. The rest of the years they had to pay if they wanted to do it. So most of the people was coming here walking. The gate is a symbol, So yes, the gate is open. You can go in. You can come out. But coming out through the holy door is understanding nothing. Because the door is not a door to come out. It's a door to go in. It's a call, When we use the expression, my house is open for you, what do you mean? That you welcome the people. You don't take them out. And that's why they place the door in the east part of the cathedral. Because that way faces the place where the sun rises. And what's in there? The world. You know how Romans used to call us? The end of the earth. Finis terra. We were considered the western edge. So for us, the world was that way, which is where the pilgrims come from, because the way enters Spain exactly on the other side of the country, and pilgrims follow a straight line east-west. In the morning they wake up, the sun is on their necks. In the evening they stop walking and they see which way they have to follow for the next day. The sun sets just in front of them. They follow the sun from east to west, from the beginning to the end, from the alpha to the omega. It's like a very beautiful idea that has always embraced Santiago. And the result of that is that when they arrive finally to Santiago, after walking all the way, they come sunburned on the back of their legs and only this side of their face. So if you ever do it, walk backward from time to time so you get a homogeneous. Please, these comments are only for us, We don't export to them all, otherwise we will start ritualistic pilgrimage. You've been to Fatima in Portugal, haven't you? Yeah. I'm finishing now, okay, but I just want to express one idea, because sometimes people mix up places that are very different. All of them important. I don't mean this is more important or less, but it's different. When people go to places like Fatima or Lourdes, the important thing is being there. But the pilgrimage to Santiago, it's as important, coming as being. The expression that you use in English, it's more important the journey than the goal. So the pilgrimage, it's also sort of spiritual experience from a very wide point of view. But a pilgrim's way cannot exist without a goal. And what is the goal? That. I tell you that because you will be surprised of seeing how many people that are not only Catholic, come to Santiago. Lots of Protestants come. Because the pilgrimage applies to everybody, and because the history of Santiago is much, much, much previous to the system. We are now on the south gate, and the second street to the left would be Franco.
Okay.
So we came this way, but not in this street, on the parallel ones, okay? So this is a space that if I were you, I would try to keep in mind. Because 1, 2, 3, 4 streets parallel one to another, that they all come from the place where the park, where the bus left, is the easiest. And that gate of the cathedral, which is the only one that still looks a bit how it was in the past, because that's the only Romanesque entry of the cathedral, that is the best access and the most comfortable one. The name of the square is Plateria, silversmith. It's one example how they transformed an inclined terrain of pressed ground, into a square with 2 levels and paved on granite. And making something geometrical instead of that kind of squares that existed on the Middle Ages that were just a space at the end where the streets finish. Because, a spider web, that's like all cities were. And what about that? That's a building that is not a building. You know the expression, walks like a duck, croaks like a duck, must be a duck? No. You see the silver shop on the ground floor? It's only 2.5 meters deep, that's it. Nothing else. First floor, same thing. Second floor, same thing. No one lives there. No one has ever lived there, and I doubt no one will ever live there unless will be a sociopath, because if you invite 5 friends to have a glass of beer, you have to put them all in line.